Hey, good morning, everybody. Whoa. It is great to be in Houston, Texas. And I have to tell you, I was looking at the calendar. It was exactly 35, this is going to be embarrassing, but it was exactly 35 years ago today. So January 4th, 1981, when I took my first airplane flight as a college senior to come to Houston, Texas to interview for the Shell Oil Company as an accountant 35 years ago. And so Houston is a very special place because this is where I had my first job, started my for-profit career, which was kind of short, and then where I met my wife, who was actually a supervisor at the Shell Oil Company, my supervisor. I was just trying to get a good performance review, and yeah, well, that didn't work out so well because she was here just a couple minutes ago, and if you were to talk to her, she would tell you that I wasn't doing very well at Shell, and she would have fired me if I'd been there much longer. But it's where our kids were born, it's where we lived, it's where I got to be with two institutions that are so important to this alliance. The Houston Food Bank, Brian Green, the president of the Houston Food Bank, was just speaking over here on the stage. And the University of Houston, where I got my MBA. Go Cougars, we got a few here. Did I get it right? No, I didn't get it right. There we go. That's right, right? Yeah. So it's very excited to be here and to be here with all of you. You know, my journey in the nonprofit sector is not one that I would recommend to any of you at all, because we didn't at that time have what you all have today. But to tell you how I got to Houston in 1981, I need to go back 4 years to 1977. And I was graduating from high school. I didn't even know I was going to go to college, and if I was going to go to college, I didn't know what I was going to do. But I was at a high school graduation party, and Uncle Harold came up to me. Now, we all have a weird Uncle Harold. His name might not be Harold, but we all know those kind of guys. And so our Uncle Harold was someone who came up to me and he said, "I've got one word for you." Now, first of all, before I tell you what that word was, have any of you, this is a young audience, but have any of you seen the movie The Graduate? Anybody? The Graduate? Dustin Hoffman? All right, good. We have a couple in there. Well, there's a scene in The Graduate where the guy goes to Dustin Hoffman and he goes, "I've got one word for you." Anybody remember what the word was? Plastics. Yeah, nice. All right. Well, weird old Uncle Harold comes up to me and he says, "I've got one word for you." And you know what the word was? Accounting. I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "The world is always going to need accountants, and you should consider going into accounting." Okay. I'm giving you advice right now. That is not how you should select what you are going to be majoring in. Now, because all of you are here, you're a whole lot smarter than I am, because I don't think you picked the nonprofit sector because you're going to be making tens of millions of dollars, later on in your career. You've picked it for other reasons. But at that time, I didn't know what I was going to do, and so I listened to Uncle Harold, and I became an accounting major. And then Shell Oil Company came up to Pennsylvania. They were looking for accountants. Houston was booming. Houston was booming because oil was booming. And it was the only job offer I got. And so I came to Houston to interview. And somehow they were either so desperate, which is what I think they were, because I don't think I really impressed them in my light blue polyester leisure suit. But they hired me, and I was here. And so I'm an accountant for the Shell Oil Company, and I remember distinctly driving to work one day. I'd been there about a year, and I'm listening to the radio. I'm driving in the 1976 Buick Century. It had you ever hear a three-body trunk, a tree-body trunk? You could fit 3 bodies in the trunk of this car. It was massive. You could see the gas gauge go down as I drive to work. But I'm driving to work, I'm listening to the radio, and the Gallup organization had just come out with a new poll. And the poll it said that 80% of all Americans, if given the choice, would choose to do something different than what they were doing today. And I thought, wow, that is really sad. I mean, that is really sad. I mean, think about it. 80% of all Americans, if they had the choice, or if they, you know, we all have choices, but if they could choose to do something different, they would have a job different than what they were doing then. I thought that is just terrible. And then the next thought came into my head. I'm one of those 80%. Because if I had a choice, I would not be accounting for natural gas up in South Dakota, a substance you can't see, a place I'd never been, and it just wasn't all that great. And so it was a realization. Well, you know, as I thought about, well, what would I be doing? I knew what it wasn't, but I wasn't sure what it was. But I knew that the one thing that I was excited about were the nonprofit organizations that I was volunteering with. But I was volunteering with them. And I distinctly remember a spring day in Houston. It was a beautiful day, beautiful Saturday. And I had heard that a presentation was going to take place on world hunger. And for some reason, that just kind of, you know, I'd never gone hungry. We never worried about a meal. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor. And this idea that there were people in the world that didn't have enough to eat was intriguing to me. But I still remember waking up that Saturday morning and thinking, oh, do I want to spend an entire day in a Houston ballroom listening about world hunger? But I thought, yeah, I do. And so I went. And at the end of it, different people got up and spoke about their organization. And one person was the executive director of the newly formed Houston Galveston Area Food Bank. And so I went up to him afterwards and said, look, I really like what you guys do, taking food that would otherwise be thrown away, giving it to people who need it. That just, you know, that resonated with me. What do you need help with? Well, they needed money. And they said, would you be on a fundraising committee? So I was on a fundraising committee. And then they asked me to be on the board, and I was on the board. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, they asked, would you be the executive director of the Houston Food Bank? Now, I was 23 years old. Now, doesn't that sound exciting, though, to be the executive director of the Houston Galveston Area Food Bank? And in some ways, it was, right? But there was just a little bit of a challenge, and that is that in the span of those 8 months, they had gone through 3 executive directors. They had been shut down by the City of Houston Health Department. They had been kicked out of the National Food Bank Association. I know this is pretty impressive to be able to do all this stuff in 8 months. They had cheese and butter that was like melting in an un-air-conditioned warehouse. Come to Houston in the summer, and you'll get a sense of what that was like. And the other items that they had were ice cream cones, magic shell, which is the stuff that you put over. We had everything but the ice cream. And rice flour, which today would actually be a great thing. You know, it doesn't have gluten, with all the gluten stuff. But at that time, we didn't have a clue. Other than that, everything was great. And so, you know, I started with the food bank. And I got a couple of my friends, and we just kind of worked it. I just saw Brian Green, the new, no, not the new, but the president. Is that Brian in the back? Is he sitting back there? Yeah, there you are. Who has done an incredible job. And the Houston Food Bank now, I mean, not only is it the best food bank in the world, it's the biggest. He's doing a phenomenal job. And, but that wasn't the case at the time. And I remember when I was thinking about it, you know, it would be a cut in salary. There weren't any benefits. There were, you know, all these challenges. And I remember thinking at the time, 2 things. One is that there were a million people that were better qualified to be in this position than I was. I mean, I had never supervised a person before. I'd never reported to a board. I didn't know anything about hunger in Houston. I didn't know anything about volunteerism, about dealing with the media, about how to raise money, about, I mean, you could write a book on what I didn't know. But here was the thing. I felt like, how much worse could it get, right? Actually, I didn't think that. I thought, this is what I did think, and this would be my first point to you. My first thought was, what's the worst thing that could happen? And the worst thing that could happen would be that I would fail, right? That would be the worst thing, and that would not be good for the organization. Certainly wouldn't be good for me, except my thought was, well, I could always go back to being a mediocre accountant, right? Somewhere. But that is the first lesson that I would give to you, and that is around the word failure. Because as Americans, we have this, I think, a distorted view of the word of failure. We want to avoid it at all costs. Now, here's the thing. We need to have a fear of failure. Listen, I prepared for this talk because I didn't want to stand up in front of you and appear like a moron, right? And so having a healthy fear of failure is a really good thing. But it's when you have an unhealthy fear of failure that paralyzes you, that prevents you from doing something. Now, the reality is that there was not only a chance that I would have failed at the Houston Food Bank, but actually a pretty good chance, right? But there are really three questions around failure. So one is, can you deal with it? But secondly is think about failure. What would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? Okay? What would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? Because that's what you should be doing, right? Now, the second question, though, is what will you do when you fail? Because the reality is that you will fail in your endeavors. You do. Failure takes place all the time. And it's not the fact that you fail, it's what you do after you fail. Because if you become so paralyzed by it that you're never going to try that again, then you're not going to go after it. And the fact is that we fail all the time, and you need to be able to pick yourself up and to be able to dust yourself off and get at it again. Failure, if it's in the right perspective, is a really, really good thing. Sometimes that's the only way we learn, is when we fail. And it causes you to reflect and to be able to get back up and get at it. Well, the good news is that we failed a lot. We had a lot of challenges, but 11 years later, I was able to go to another great organization called called Habitat for Humanity International, and once again, it came about because of my volunteer efforts, and so I was volunteering. The Houston affiliate of Habitat for Humanity was getting started, and so the founder was a guy named Carl Umlin, and he was looking for a place to store donated materials. And he wanted to use our warehouse. And our warehouse was already full, but I said, sure, we could store it for a little while. How long do we need to store these supplies? He said, oh, just a couple months. Well, about 3 years later, I was still looking at this blue paint and blue bathtubs and blue, it was just all blue. And, but I got involved with Houston Habitat for Humanity, and I was on their board. And he would always talk about the international organization, that I needed to come and see the work of Habitat all around the world. And so one day the position became open to head global development for Habitat for Humanity International. And so I applied, and I sat down with the founder, and the founder of Habitat for Humanity, a guy named Millard Fuller. And he said, I've got 3 questions for you. He said, number 1, what do you know about direct mail? And so I gave him an answer, and he said, there's probably another position here that you would be better at. I was like, seriously? 1 question and I'm out of it? I mean, but anyway. And he asked some other question, and then the third question was, he goes, David, he was from the South. He was from Lynette, Alabama. Big, tall guy, 6'5", probably didn't weigh 150 pounds. He said, we've got a phrase down here in the South, and the phrase is, what melts your butter? He's like, could you say that again? He goes, what melts your butter? What gets you up in the morning? What puts a skip in your step? What do you get excited about? What are you passionate about? What melts your butter? Well, anyway, I must have given him somewhat of a good answer because he hired me in a different position, and it was the chief operating officer of the organization. But once again, it was a position that I was absolutely not qualified for at all. The only time I'd ever even been outside the country was on our honeymoon to Cancun. I didn't know anything about community development. I didn't know anything about building. We always used to talk about, I want somebody around here who knows what a soffit is. I remember thinking, God, what's a soffit? I didn't know what a soffit was. Some of you might not know what a soffit is. I don't want to explain it, but I can't explain it. But there were all these things where I was not qualified for this job. And yet it was an organization that as I learned about it, I was really excited about. And so that's a question that I think all of you should ask yourself as well, is what melts your butter? I mean, what do you get excited about? You know, for me, the whole reason I was able to get into the nonprofit sector is that when I was in college, a very big thing happened in my life, and I became a Christian. And as I started reading the Bible, I was shocked at how much concern that God showed towards the poor, the disenfranchised, the dispossessed. And it was a revelation to me, and I had absolutely no idea. And so as I thought about, you know, what I wanted to do with my life, that became the central theme. And so when I thought about, well, what melts my butter, that was it. And I just wasn't sure, though, exactly what that meant. Well, early on, it was being involved with taking food and making sure that people in the richest country in the world, that food should be the last thing that anybody thinks about, that they would have enough to eat. And with Habitat, to be able to provide decent housing for people. Again, something that all of us take for granted. We don't think about the fact that when we turn on a spigot, that we get clean water, that it's clean water, that it's hot water. When you take a shower, it's clean hot water. That when it rains, although I did notice it was raining over here and there was water coming down, but when it rains, that we don't worry about having a roof over our head. And so for me, that was what resonated with me. But I firmly believe that every person, and we're talking about social change, that in my opinion, that God has placed in your heart a special burden or a special need, that either there's an opportunity out there or there's a problem that you see that hits you. You know, I can look at a number of different issues and I can say, yeah, that's an important issue, but it doesn't hit me the way those issues do. And I'm telling you, with each and every one of you, there are issues, there are problems, there are opportunities that are out there that speak to you. And as you progress in your career, that's what you should try to be involved in. Early on in your career, if you've decided the nonprofit sector is what you want to do, then you know what, you're going to have to take some different jobs. Maybe you're not as excited about those early on, but what I would say to you, in this day and age, you should be able to do that which melts your butter. And here's the crazy part, is that if you look back, even 100 years, right, and look at what people were doing. If you were a farmer, why were you a farmer? It's because your dad was a farmer, and his dad was a farmer. Or if you were a tailor, that's because that was your lot in life. And guess what? If you were a woman, and it wasn't all that long ago, you were a teacher or you were a nurse. And that's not even thinking about people of color who had even less opportunities than that. That is not the case today. There's no reason you can't pick that which you are passionate about. And if you don't hear anything else that I've talked about today, it would be that. Do that in which you're passionate about. Do that which, when you hear about that issue, when you read about it in the paper or see it on TV or look at it on your screen and you say, that's not right, or I could do something about that. Follow that. How great is it to be able to do something like that? To be able to put all your energy into something that you feel passionate about. So I was fortunate to be at Habitat for Humanity, totally unqualified for the job, and some days I'd think that, you know, somebody's going to figure out I am not the right person for this job. But I was there again another 11 years, and we had certain things that came up with Habitat, and the founder was asked to leave, and so I had an opportunity. There was an organization, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, that came along, and they were looking for a CEO. And what was different about this one than anything else was that I had had no prior experience with Make-A-Wish, which, by the way, is one of the great things about this sector. You can volunteer. You can find out what this organization is really like. You can find out what it's like if you think you would like to build homes or work in international relief and development. You can volunteer for those organizations. You can't volunteer for AT&T. Now, you can intern, right? But those are competitive and all that kind of stuff. But I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity that this sector has to be able to explore what's out there. So Make-A-Wish was an organization I didn't know anything about. And so one of the first things I did was to get in the my wife drove down. I actually met her in Orlando. There's a wonderful organization called Give Kids the World, which is where kids who are going on their wish to go to Disney World stay. And I had the opportunity to go down there for a weekend and meet the families that are on their wish to go to Disney World. And what it did for me was to figure out, you know, it was going to be one of those things where after I'm there for a weekend, I'm either going to know, wow, this is an organization that I could be really excited about or not. And I was amazed. And because before then, you know, I had heard of Make-A-Wish, and I thought, oh, that's a nice organization. You know, they send kids to Disney World. I've been to Disney World. That's a nice place. Well, that's not what it is at all. And when you hear their stories and hear what these families go through, and it's the entire family that goes through it. That little 30-second blip that you saw about Matthew wanting to see snow. So the good news is that we filmed that in 2005. 10 years later, still with us. So he's, yeah, through remission. His brother, who, I don't know if you saw his little brother that was in there, that was in the PSA, same diagnosis. He also received a wish. He's still doing great. The part that's really sad is that his mom, the mom that was in there, actually came down with cancer, and she did pass away. Now, I tell you that to say that, you know, when a kid has a life-threatening condition, it's not just the child that deals with that. That entire family's world turns upside down. All of a sudden, siblings get kind of pushed off to the side. Because what's everybody's first wish? For that child to get better, right? And instead of fooling with ballet and Little League and grades and all those kind of things that we think are so important, all that stuff gets pushed off to the side because what everybody's wish is for that child to overcome their illness. And the good news is that because of all the advances in medicine, more and more kids are surviving their illness. So when Make-A-Wish started back in 1980, it was for kids who had a terminal diagnosis. That was how you qualified for a wish. It's still one of the biggest problems that we have today because it's the power of first impressions. You don't think first impressions are important? They are, because one of the biggest problems we have today is that people think that's what you have to have in order to qualify for a wish. But you have to have a life-threatening medical condition, which means that some kids, in fact, don't survive their illnesses, but more and more do. And actually, the medical profession is beginning to use wishes in a strategic manner to be able to help that child and that family get better. And the conversation goes something like this. Listen, you have osteosarcoma. You're going to have 8 months of chemotherapy. You're going to have 4 months of radiation. You're going to have surgery. If you do all the things we tell you to do, you're going to be healthy enough to be able to go on your wish. So do everything we tell you to do. How great is that? That's not a dying wish. That's not a last wish. That is helping you be able to think about the future, to be able to hope. And we're in the nonprofit sector. If we're not about hope, if we're not about hope for a better tomorrow, then I don't know what we're about, right? So with Make-A-Wish, that was the one organization that I had no involvement in before, but I had to find out. Because if you're going to be a leader in this sector, you have to believe in the organization in which you're representing. You have to. Because here's the thing. You know, I may not like Exxon because of that oil tanker, or what, I better be careful. I'm in Houston. This is where Exxon's headquartered. But you know what? If they're selling the cheapest gas and it's right around the corner, right, and it's the most convenient, I'm probably going to suck it up and buy it anyway. In the nonprofit sector, giving is not mandatory. Giving is a discretionary exercise. People don't have to do it, number one. Number two, there are 1.5 million charities in this country alone, right? So even if somebody's really generous, they don't have to give to your charity, which means that there has to be a compelling reason to do it. And one of the most compelling reasons to do it, especially when you start talking about bigger gifts, is the passion and the intellect of the leadership of the organization. Because if I don't believe in the leadership of the organization, why in the world would I make a contribution? And that's why all this is so important, because the expectations that are being placed on the nonprofit sector are getting greater and greater every day. Donors are expecting more. And you know what? That's a good thing. It is absolutely a good thing. I couldn't even apply to be a receptionist at the Houston Food Bank, let alone the executive director, with the qualifications that I had at that time. And that is a good thing. You can get a bachelor's degree in nonprofit leadership and management. You can get a master's degree. You can get a PhD. That is building the talent of this sector. And we need to do that because expectations are growing. And that's a good thing. That's what we need to embrace. And so as our future leaders of this sector, I can't tell you how excited I am that organizations like this exist, that I'm sitting here in a ballroom in Houston, Texas, talking to 500 people who have said, the nonprofit sector is important. It's my major. It's my minor. It's something that I'm considering doing. I mean, how great is that? Other sectors have been doing this for years, but this is something that's important today. And it's important today because the nonprofit sector is not going to be diminishing in the future. It's only going to become more and more important. And organizations like the ones I've been involved in and others are only going to get bigger, but it's not a foregone conclusion. Anybody that raises money knows getting bigger is not a foregone conclusion because there is a lot of competition and because giving is a discretionary act. And so what does that mean? That means there has to be inspired leadership. And so, as I wrap up my remarks, I would just want to say a couple final things. As the future of the nonprofit sector, number one, don't be afraid to fail, right? Have a healthy outlook on failure, but don't let it paralyze you. Think about what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail, and then realize that failure is inevitable. You will fail, especially if you go for it. I had no business being the head of the Houston Food Bank. I had no business being the chief operating officer of Habitat for Humanity. In my role as the CEO of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, I'm finally in a position that I was qualified for. And it feels great, But it's a hard job, but it's a great job. And I can honestly say, if I'm going to work one day and I hear on the radio that 80% of all Americans wish they were doing something else, I can stand before you and say, I am not part of that 80%. Now, how great is that, right? And that would be my wish for you. I'm in the wish granting business, right? So I'm going to make a wish right now. I wish for you that you are able to be in jobs that you have a passion for, that melt your butter, right? That you're able to do, and you're able to do well, not because you're the smartest person in the room, and you will be a smart person, but because when you run up against issues, when you run up against problems, it's not just a job. It's not just something that you're doing. It's something that you care deeply about. And one way or another, you're going to figure that thing out. You're going to ask the people you need to ask, or you're going to spend the extra hours to get it done. And you're going to do it not because it's good for your career. You're going to do it because you believe in the mission of that organization. You believe in it so strongly because you have met the people that benefit from your organization, from the people that your organization serves. And when you have that in here, listen, ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have that kind of passion. They just can. And that would be my wish for you, that you would be able to, maybe not immediately, but ultimately be in that kind of a role. I have to put in one shameless plug, though, for Make-A-Wish, and that is that we have someone here, Mackenzie. Somebody of you may have seen her. There's Mackenzie. So Mackenzie heads up our internship program. Every semester, we have 20 paid internships at our national office. And we instituted this about 7 or 8 years ago. And now, we also have 62 chapters around the country, all in areas that you're in. And they all have internships. And in fact, I've even met Whitney. Ann Whitney is an intern with our San Diego chapter. Yay! And so we have chapters all over the country. But we started this at the national office about 8 years ago. And we started it for a couple different reasons. The first reason was that, as I explained with the first 2 jobs that I had, I came in contact with those organizations as a volunteer. And I know how important volunteers are. So whether you're a paid intern or an unpaid intern, internships are important. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that with our interns, I always meet with them at the end of their internship. And one of the questions I ask was, so tell me about it. How was the experience? And inevitably, they all come back and they say, I can't believe the amount of responsibility you gave to me. I was kind of shocked. I thought, are you really sure you want to give this much responsibility to me? Which then makes me think, well, why should we have had that kind of concern? But actually, it's a good thing, is that we give a lot of responsibility to interns. So these are real experiences. Number 2 is they do great work. And that's the fantastic thing about young people. You guys are smart. You're so much smarter than old guys like me. I just have more experience than you do, really. But what you have, and the experiences, the education, the training that you've had, you're so smart, and you bring that to the workplace. Who would not want to have that kind of energy and enthusiasm in their workplace? And so the second reason is great stuff gets done in our organization. Every time a semester is done, I get a report of all the things that were accomplished by our interns every semester. And I'm blown away by it. And I think that's pretty exciting. The third one, though, is since we started the program, 31 interns have not only been offered positions, but have accepted positions in full-time employment with Make-A-Wish America. And you know what? That is a good deal all the way around. Because when you do an internship, you get a chance to see what it's like being in that organization. That organization gets to see what it's like, what your work ethic is like. And if there's a match, it doesn't get any better than that, right? So I would strongly encourage you to go over here and see Mackenzie when you get a chance and learn more about some of the internships that we have. All right, I'm done with the plug on that. But overall, volunteer, internships, it doesn't matter. That is the great thing about the nonprofit sector. You can do that. And one of the best things that can happen, believe it or not, is you can have a bad experience. Sometimes it's important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is to figure out what you do want to do. Because a lot of times what happens is that people say, oh, it would be so great to work for Make-A-Wish. I'll bet every day it's just so wonderful. I'll bet everybody's just smiles every day and everybody's so happy. Guess what? It's not like that. Now, at the end of the day, do we all realize that we're part of a great organization? Absolutely. Do we have wonderful people that work there who want to make a difference? You bet. But you know what? It's still an organization made of fallen people who have bad days, who get upset with each other. And sometimes, you need to experience that to realize that it is not this side of heaven. It is a great thing. But, just because an organization has a great mission doesn't necessarily mean they have a great culture, right? And so you want to be able to learn that. You want to be able to figure that out. I have been very, very fortunate to now say that for 32 years, I've been in the nonprofit sector. I've been able to meet the most amazing people, volunteers, donors, people who want to make an impact. And I know the theme of this conference is about social change. And the only thing that I would say to you is that, before you change the world, it's got to start right here. It has to start within. When I was Catholic, there was a song that we always used to sing back in the 70s. It was called "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And I'm not going to sing it for you, which is a good thing. But essentially the line was, "Let there be peace on earth, but let it begin with me." Right? So we all want, who doesn't want world peace, right? Everybody wants world peace. But it's got to begin within. It's got to begin within your own self, that you're not going to be afraid to fail. That when you do fail, you're going to pick yourself back up. That you're going to get involved with a cause, with an organization that you have a passion for, right? And if you do that, if you have a healthy fear of failure and you're involved in something that you have a passion for, I promise you, you will change our world. Because those are the people that do it. It's the people that get knocked down, that get told no time and time and time again. You look at any great movement, you look at any great organization, you usually hear about all the great things, you don't hear about how many times they were told no, how many obstacles were put in their way. We don't hear about that as much, but I promise you they were there. But they were people that were passionate, who did not take no for an answer, and who kept at it. And those are the kind of leaders that we need in our sector. And so I'm glad you're here. I hope there are at least one or two nuggets that kind of resonated with you. And I think we still have a couple minutes for questions. And so I think there are going to be two mics on either side. So if anybody's got a question, I think we've got a couple minutes to be able to hopefully answer them. And if I can't answer them, I'm going to ask Mackenzie to answer them for me. Okay? You up for that? All right, good. Or we could go to lunch.
Tell us a memorable miracle.
Hi.
Okay, that'll be the second one. Yes.
Is this not working?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi.
I'm from ASU. I'm Cynthia. We actually met like once. But I wanted to ask you, what is your life like every single day as CEO of Make-A-Wish?
Okay. So the question was, what's my life like? What's a daily experience? So, I think some of it is that it is a little varied. So I travel a little bit. And so this month I'll be going to Indianapolis. One of our big corporate sponsors is Sears Hometown. And so they've become a 7-figure sponsor. So we'll do an event with them. After that, I'll be going to New York to ask for a $25 million gift from somebody. And so hopefully that's fun. We'll see. We have a board meeting in Orlando in January. And so we meet with the board 4 times a year. We have an executive committee that meets monthly. And then I have a trip to Dallas to meet with 2 prospective board members. So we have a board of 25 people. These are all C-suite executives. So very smart people, very talented people, and very people who are passionate about the organization. And so it's trying to figure out, is this a right fit? And really spelling out, here are our expectations if you're going to be a national board member, and does that fit with your time constraints and all of that. When I'm in the office, we have a senior leadership team. We have 8 vice presidents, so I meet with them. weekly, and so we'll sit down either for 30 minutes or an hour, depending on the depending on the VP, and we'll go through. I've got a list of things, and they've got a list of things, and we kind of go through it. We also have a senior leadership team meeting that'll go for either 2 to 3 hours, sometimes an hour. I mean, it's really based on what our agenda is. But all these VPs are not just leaders of their area. So these are people like the CFO, the Chief Information Officer, Chief Human Resources Officer, our VP of Corporate Alliances, VP of Development, VP of Brand, folks like that. So they're all subject matter experts, right? They're all in charge of big departments. But at the same time, they're also organizational leaders. And so one of the things that I try to do is to say, look, the best decisions that we're going to make are not ones where I'm sitting in my office and I just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. The best decisions are when we've got 9 people, 9 really smart people sitting around a table and saying, what's a better way for us to be able to recognize our employees or to have a better work environment or, deal with budget issues. And so I spend a lot of time with those folks. We have 62 CEOs around the country, so I also spend time usually on the phone or email, talking with them. So I spend a lot of time, believe it or not, listening. And it's the one lesson that I would also put out to you. When I was young, I had a grandfather who was a milkman. And I don't know if you know what a milkman is, but at one time you just couldn't go to a store and get milk. He would deliver it. And so we were on his route, and he would let me help him. Now, he was a wonderful grandfather. He was a terrible milkman. And the reason he was a terrible milkman is that there were a lot of people who were homebound on his route. And the only people that they would see very often was him. And so they would ask him to just stay for a minute and have a cup of coffee. And so I learned at a very young age, or I had a model of how powerful it is to be a good listener. And the reality is that a lot of times we don't value that as much. We think about leadership as people who are motivating and who are brilliant and who have great ideas and who are energizing and all that and all that stuff is right. But I would just say to you, one of the best skills that you can develop is the skill to listen. Because so often the idea is right there. The problem is right there. You just have to take a second and listen and then collaboratively figure out where to go next. So, yes, in the back.
Hello? Okay. So obviously you know what the CNP credential is, but it's a new to a lot of people. I've noticed that not everybody knows what it is. So I guess my question for you is sort of like what your thoughts are on it, and if you would consider making it a requirement at any point in time, or if, how much it maybe distinguishes someone from the competition. Just your general thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Hadn't thought about that. I think that, well, just like I said earlier, the fact that people are now getting degrees and being certified in the nonprofit sector, that is so good for the sector. And I will tell you that, I look at a lot of resumes, and in fact, we're still at the size where I will still interview the final candidate for every position in the organization, including administrative assistants and receptionists. And it's all around the belief that, you know what, that next receptionist that we hire, maybe that's our president in 30 years. But that's how we need to think. We need to think about that we're always looking for leadership. We're always looking for talent. And so I would just say that anybody that's gone through the effort to either become certified, to have a degree in nonprofit management or leadership, to have a minor in it, I guess I'm less concerned about the technical skill. I think that's good. What it tells me more is somebody is serious about having a career in the nonprofit sector. And that's probably the best thing. That's the one thing you have to sell when you're interviewing with somebody is, listen, I want to be here. I want to be part of what you're doing. So, but I'll think about the whole requirement thing. Anybody else? And we had one question down here, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And that was about a wish. You know, kind of what was the most magical wish? I don't know that this was the most magical one, but let me tell you about one that I think is remarkable, and that is the very first wish that was granted. And I want to tell you that because I think there are a lot of lessons in it for us. So go back to 1980, Phoenix, Arizona. There's a boy by the name of Chris Gracious, and he has leukemia. Now, in 1980, if you had leukemia, there was a 90% chance that you would not survive your illness. Today, you have leukemia, there's a 90% chance that you will survive your illness. But that wasn't the case at that time. And as his illness continued, everybody knew he wasn't going to make it. Well, Chris had a favorite TV show, and it was called Chips. Anybody ever hear of that show? A couple of people? All right, there we go. He had this favorite TV show. For those of you who don't know about that show, it was about these two California highway patrolmen. And they would go all around, and it was Eric Estrada, and anyway, if you really want to know more, I'm sure you can Google it or find an episode on YouTube. But anyway, he loved that show. And his dream was that when he grew up, that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a highway patrolman. They were the good guys. They were the good guys who took care of the bad guys. And so as it became evident he was not going to live much longer, a group of volunteers got together and said, you know, we should try to create something for him, for Chris. So one sewed a uniform. One contacted the Arizona Department of Public Safety and said, do you think we could arrange a day where he could ride on a motorcycle, in a police car, and in a helicopter? And these 5 volunteers got together. There's no organization. There's no funding. They get together, and they make this happen. The next day, he's in the hospital. The next day, he passes away. Now, here's the thing, is that those individuals so easily could have said, wow, that was really powerful. That was a really good thing that we did. Now we need to get back to our jobs. We need to get back to our families. We need to get back to, you know, real life. We need to whatever. But they didn't. They didn't. They said, you know what? I'll bet there are other kids out there just like Chris. And what would it take for us to create an organization to be able to help kids just like him? Now again, these were ordinary people. We're not talking about any millionaires or billionaires. These were ordinary people. A couple policemen, a housewife. I don't even know what a PR guy. And they said, let's start an organization. Their first gift was $21.76 or something like that. And they created this organization, Make-A-Wish, that now raises over $300 million a year, grants a wish every 27 minutes somewhere in the United States. But it started because 5 ordinary individuals saw something, they saw a need, and they said, let's do something about it. And it started small, and it started with one kid. One kid. And to me, that's always the most magical, the most impressive one. Because there wasn't this big old organization behind them, giving them templates, giving them guidelines, giving them money. There was none of that. They were on their own. And to me, that's inspiring. That's inspiring to me. I hope that's inspiring to you. That organizations like Make-A-Wish and Habitat and the Food Bank and a whole host of others, they didn't start that way. They started small. They started with a group of people who just said, let's do something because it's the right thing to do, because this problem shouldn't exist. And there are probably 100 people that are more qualified to do this than I am. But you know what? I'm here right now, and so I'm going to do something. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to do something. That's how great organizations get started. And I hope you're part of those in the future. So, thank you.